Are we on?
Good.
The camera's not showing me what I'm doing, so in fact the camera has vanished from where you said it was. Aha! Splendid. Right. Welcome back to the afternoon session of TACOS, and it is my privilege as Keith May from English Heritage to introduce three more speakers this afternoon in the session which has been titled, for perhaps better or worse, Information Systems and Technology. But I think, as most people in the room are probably hopefully aware, it's going to be impossible to cover all the plethora of information systems and technology that we might have even tried to choose in this session. So what we've really done is just pick three people who hopefully are going to give some ideas, some latest updates on interesting and exciting research work they've done, and also perhaps also cover the issue of how to turn exciting and innovative new ideas in research and design into perhaps more practical and implementable systems and technologies that we can go forward with. I think that was sort of part of the theme of what we were talking about in terms of the skills this morning. Like, what are the actual skills and knowledge that you can take forward, as well as all the whizzy toys that we like to play with. So, as I was sort of saying, I mean, please consider that the speakers that are coming on are going to be sort of indicative, and by no means suggesting that what they're talking about is any more significant or less significant than other work that people are doing. But we hope it really, just like everything else, engenders discussion for the rest of the afternoon. Part of the point is that we all know IT keeps moving at a great pace, if anything accelerating, and certainly research and development do, and there is something of a dichotomy there between sort of how it moves in an academic circle and how perhaps some of it moves, I'm aware, in the sort of what we'd call the commercial sector, for want of a better word, which I think is very underrepresented in this room. The people who are out there right now working in the field because they can't afford to be here, unless there's some way of them of being funded to do so. So there's a challenge really in that, I think, from the skills and practice, and the challenge is how to steer the sort of research and development, the research projects work that we're talking about probably more today, towards kind of effective implementations that may just become the standard practice in the field or in the office in 10 years' time. Interestingly though, at the same time, I think some things in the world actually can move quicker than academic practice, and things just get adopted in the real world that we're not expecting. You know, the use of mobile phones to some extent just sort of took off, and now we all stand here holding one, clutching one carefully in case I need it. But overall, I think that reflects again that the biggest challenge, as people have said already, is the social one. You know, what do people actually want to do with this stuff? How do they want to use it? And just from a little bit of personal experience, I mean, I can remember sort of 10 years ago when I first started dabbling in the area that I now call semantic technologies. It was my sort of the bit of research that I managed to do when I'm not wearing my EH hat all the time. And I used an analogy, I think it was at the Williamsburg CAA, when I'm looking for Leaf, we were there, and I feel like sometimes at the start of this I was the only person in the room with a mobile phone. I had this new technology. What use was it if nobody else in the world had a mobile phone? And I still think, there is still that sense a bit in that research about, does anyone else want to use this technology? The real question is, do you want to share? It's not, do you want to use this technology, but do you want to use it to talk to other people? So I think that's a challenge, and probably at that point, I'll take the opportunity to introduce my three colleagues who, in some metaphorical sense, have picked up their mobile phones. They were there at the time, and we at least had 4 mobile phones and talked to each other a bit. So with no further ado, where's Ceri? Are you ready to roll? I'll also mention, after Ceri will come Paul Cripps, and then I think Dan Pett's going to give us a whirlwind tour through all the technologies that he likes to play with. Okay, so I'd like to talk about the Seneschal project, which recently finished, undertaken by ourselves at the University of South Wales, in conjunction with English Heritage, the 2 Royal Commissions, and the Archaeology Data Service. I'll just talk a little bit about the deliverables, or what we set out to achieve, what we did achieve, what we maybe didn't achieve. So a whistle-stop tour. So the first thing I want to do before getting into the kind of technology area is talk about what the problems are. Kind of thing. So it's an interesting exercise. If you searched in Google on the wives of Henry VIII and then clicked on images, see if we can spot the problem in the top results that we get back from the biggest search company on the entire planet. Okay? So instantly, we've got a little insight into how Google's actually working, because it's doing a little magic trick, and it's making us believe that it knows what we mean. It knows exactly what we mean, but actually, just indexing using words is ambiguous. And so if they're used in metadata indexing, then there's an inherent possibility of ambiguity in the results. So Google's performing a kind of illusion. It's an impressive magic trick. It's making us believe we type in what we want and we get back things. It's understood us. All it's really done is done some statistical calculations on the juxtaposition of words in documents. Yeah. So true meaning is not really built into the resources they're indexing. It's just whether words are next to each other. So the task of ambiguity resolution gets delegated back to the user. So we need to look at this and say, right, well, we know this is one of the wives of Henry VIII. We know this one isn't. Yeah. So Google has done a lot of the hard work there because it's made the association between the phrase wives of Henry VIII and Jane Seymour. But it's failed in the last little bit because it didn't really understand the data that it was handling. Okay. Now, the problem we come across all the time, particularly in archaeological data sets, or I say particularly, but it's prevalent, incompatible terminology when we're trying to describe things. And so it hinders cross-search. A lot of the projects we've been working on have been dealing with trying to cross-search data sets from different organizations. And when you try and do that, people are describing things in different ways, and you end up with a lot of difficulty at a low level of trying to match things up. So we've seen that indexing using just words is always going to be potentially ambiguous. But also you've got this consistency issue, where even if you're trying to use the same words, you're not always using quite the same words. And if the data is not used in a consistent way, if these words aren't used in a consistent way, then every time we want to reuse this data, our applications have to solve the same problems. Yeah. So if you have a look at that table on the right, if you wanted to find all the Iron Age post holes, and they were described in this way, then we've got a lot of problems to solve straight away. And we either need to go through a data cleansing process, or we need to construct quite a complicated query to account for all of these possibilities. And the problem here is in the use of text to try to convey meaning. What do we mean when we're searching for post hole, and what do we mean when we're searching for Iron Age? Whereas the underlying concepts that these records are trying to describe are the same. Yeah. But it's going to be really difficult to find all of these records without a very unnecessarily big query. So what we want to be able to do in both search and indexing is to say what we really mean and not just use words to describe these things because they're inadequate. So is there a way to indicate what we mean without using words? Could we reference something that unambiguously represents what we mean rather than trying to use a word to describe it? Could we devise some way of identifying it that's globally unique to the things we want to reference? Yes, we can. We've already got that mechanism. It already exists. It's the web. We can piggyback that architecture and reuse it for data, not just pages. Yeah? So there's an example of a resource that describes Jane Seymour. It's globally unique. It's globally referenceable. It's available 24/7. And if we refer to it, then we know we're referring to the wife of Henry VIII and not Dr. Quinn Medicine Woman. Okay? And if we go there, let's see if that works. We've got some information.
Yeah, and so it links to further information. Yeah, and if we went to some of these links, they would link to further information. So we've got a network of data using exactly the same architecture as the existing web, but describing pieces of data rather than web pages. Yeah. Let's get rid of all this rubbish. So there's a mechanism we could use to unambiguously describe things. You might say, well, we don't have these problems because all of our data is already neat and tidy, it's all clean, and we refer to internal vocabularies. That's all very nice, that's great. But our project was considering issues of wider interoperability. So we weren't looking at searching within one data set, we're looking at searching across data sets. And even when a vocabulary has been used, words are ambiguous for indexing. And so a tenement in the Scottish monument type thesaurus is a big building containing a number of rooms or flats, whereas a tenement in the English heritage monument type thesaurus is a parcel of land. So we can't automatically disambiguate search results originating from two separate sources if all they've used are words to describe these things. But if they've used thesaurus concepts, unambiguously identified using some sort of identifier mechanism, then we know that these two things are different because we've got some background information attached to them. Yeah. And when we reference them and say it's HTTP XYZ version of tenement, then everyone in the world knows which one I'm talking about. Yeah. So if we can supplement our data with identifiers that represent these concepts, it becomes very clear what we mean by tenement. Yeah. And we can express our search criteria more accurately. Okay. So what the Seneschal project was trying to do was to put existing control vocabularies online in a machine-readable way. So we had these commonly agreed concepts, terminology, and identifiers, putting them online in a consistent standard format, making them available, very importantly, using an open licensing arrangement so that people could use this data and incorporate it into their own applications. We made the data available as linked data, which I'll talk a little bit about, also as web services. There's predefined functionality that you can just call using a web address. And then we also created a number of data entry and lookup tools that actually use this data and put them into nice forms that you can slot into your web page. So you're using the vocabulary in the background. And so that rather than trying to solve these recurring vocabulary problems, we can help to stop them from happening in the first place, so that when you're typing into a field, you can have a drop-down list of vocabulary concepts coming from a controlled vocabulary. And so we're not just entering a word, we've got the word displayed, but in the background, we've got the identifier of that concept that the word represents. So what is linked data? Well, it's basically just linking things together, making them available on the web in a machine-readable way, and then creating machine-readable links between them. So if we looked at the dem bones thing, toe bone connected to the foot bone connected to the heel bone, we could represent that knowledge that's encompassed in that text by having concepts that represent each of those items and saying that they're connected to each other. Yeah. And so linked data is expressing the data in a format called RDF, Resource Description Framework. And then we're using addresses, web addresses, as identifiers for these things. And hopefully, when you go to that address, you get back some information about that thing, so you can be confident it's really what you mean. Does it look familiar to us? It's exactly the same architecture as the existing web, but instead of pages that point to other pages, we've got data items that point to other data items. Yeah, so we can make our information available on the web worldwide, and everybody else can point to it and say, this is what I mean when I mean tenement. So a quick primer of what RDF is. You have statements or triples that consist of 3 parts. So you could say that TACOS takes place in University of York. Yeah, and then the object of the triple could be an identifier which in turn can point to other things. And you can express a chain of relationships as a series of triples forming a kind of graph structure. So you can have a series of statements And we note at the moment, there's no real technology. This is just text. But what it encodes is a knowledge structure. And then we could append additional information to it. So we could say these things, TACOS took place in the University of York, attended by myself, also attended by Phil Carlisle. We could say other things about Phil Carlisle, couldn't we, and attach them to that node. Yeah? Any suggestions? So, but that's just a kind of an idiosyncratic model. I've said located in, took place in, attended by. What do those things actually mean? We need some sort of formal model that we can adhere to in order for it to really make any sense. Otherwise, we're just back to the point of all having our own data structures. So there are structures out there that we can use to describe things, and what we used for the linked data of the vocabularies was something called SKOS, Simple Knowledge Organization System. This basically encodes a number of different types of things and relationships between them that forms kind of polyhierarchical structure. So you can have concepts which are related to other concepts through broader, narrower, related relationships. And each concept then might have labels attached to it in different languages. It might have scope notes attached to them. Okay. And so we can build up gazetteers, word lists, classifications, thesauri, these kind of structures, using that very simple approach. Okay. What we can also do is to accommodate colloquial terms. So here's Blackadder meeting Dr. Johnson, who announces that he's got a book that contains every single word in the language. And so Blackadder says, right, I offer my most enthusiastic contrafibularities. And Dr. Johnson, and he starts thumbing through his book feverishly. And Blackadder says, well, this is a common word down our way. And so Dr. Johnson's very upset and starts scribbling in his book because he's missed that. So this mischievous suggestion might be a new term, but it's not a new concept. We could attach it into the existing concept structure. If we have an existing concept that's online somewhere, that's described, and we can have labels for it, we could add a new label to that concept, which means pretty much the same thing. Okay? And so we did this in terms of concept structures for the archaeological thesauri. So in the case of the monuments thesaurus for Scotland, we've got English terms, but we've also got Scottish Gaelic terms attached to the concepts. What that allows us to do is to, instead of using terms to use concepts, it allows us to search in one language and retrieve in another, because we're thinking along the lines of the concepts. So what we've got online at the moment is a number of vocabularies from English Heritage, Scottish and Welsh commissions, trying to move from term-based thinking into concept-based thinking. And then we can start to create links between concepts from different vocabularies, create knowledge, start to create links between data sets, between sites, maybe even between countries, start to create a vast graph of knowledge. And we can also do alignment between thesauri, so that when I say tomato and you say tomato, we can make a link between them and say these things are roughly the same thing. And so when I'm saying it, I can traverse that link and find all the things that use the word that you say. And we're getting towards true interoperability there of multilingual resources. So here's a quick extract, I can't really see that very well, of what we've got online at the Heritage Data site, where we've got these vocabularies made available as linked data. Got a little search facility for any one of those concepts there, and you've got a whole host of properties that these things have got. And now that's just a human readable version of the data that's exposed. There's also a machine readable version that you can get to, so you can ingest this data straight into your own applications. So rather than just display it like that, you can have it displayed in your own system. Now what we wanted to do then was to go a stage further and say, well, we're not just exposing that data and leaving you to it, we want to create some sort of controls that you can embed into your own systems, or at least some examples of them to show what can be done. So we have some web services that encompass predefined functionality, and so you go to one of these addresses, and what you get back is a block of data that represents what you've asked for, obviously. number of different service calls there. And then, on top of that, we have some little user interface controls, what we refer to as widgets, that can be embedded into your own web page to give you extended functionality to use these vocabularies within your own applications. They're all open source. They're all made available for people to take and pull apart and create new ones as they wish. They're only using our own web services as their data source, so we're not using any particular magic there. We're using the same things that are made available to everybody else, eating our own dog food, as it were. And they're configurable to work with specific concept schemes. So if you wanted something that searched on the MDA object thesaurus, you could also have something that searched on the monument type thesaurus and other thesauri that are made available. And we've got a number of online working example pages. So here's an example of some of the things we've got. The scheme widgets, where the scheme represents a thesaurus. So we've got one that lists all the schemes that are available at the moment. For any one of them, you might have some details of it, and then put together into a little composite control. See if we can get that working there. Okay, so there we go. So that has just pulled the data from the Heritage Data site, and it's given us a list of all the possible schemes in the system, and for each of them then, we've got the top concepts, the root ones in the hierarchy, and a little description. So as we go there, we can get some more information about them. Okay. Same for the concepts themselves. This is where it gets a little bit more interesting, because we can put up information that we can navigate through the concept structures that are available online. So we've got one that just shows us some details of the concept, the various different labels that are used to describe it, scope notes, one describing the relationships from these concepts to others, and one that just pulls them together into a kind of composite control. If we went there and had a look, so we've got the bow brooch, and we've got relationships to other concepts in there. And so as we click on them, it tells us what we selected, but it also navigates through the concept structure, so we can go a bit narrower. We can go broader, up through brooch, jewelry, anklet. So we're starting to navigate around that hierarchical structure. And these are little controls that can just be embedded. This is an example page where I've embedded it onto the page. And you can just view source and copy it, have it on your own website. One of the more useful ones is the term suggestion control that we have here, where it gives you this kind of drop-down suggestion a la Google. So as you start typing, it starts giving you terms from the control vocabularies. So let's see if we can get that working. Okay, so I've got a number of controls on the screen there. Originally this was just a web page with some input boxes, but you'll see if you do view source on here, you can see what I've done. I've just attached a little script to it to make these things interactive. So now instead of just allowing text entry, you can start to get suggestions from the vocabularies. And you can see down on the bottom left, as I highlight over these, we've got the actual addresses of these things. So they're not just terms, they're actually the concepts themselves. And once we start using these, we can all start talking the same language when we're talking about axes and microscopes and barrows, rather than just using the word itself, which is inherently ambiguous, as we've seen. So I mentioned they're also using different vocabularies. So the same type of control can be configured to get the data from different vocabularies. So we've got one from the archaeological objects thesaurus, archaeological sciences thesaurus, monument types. I don't know. And in the background, when I selected it, we also had an identifier we could use in our system to record the fact that we selected this term, but in the background we actually selected this concept. We might have a number of terms associated with it. Okay. So in terms of early adoption of this, this was quite a short-term project. It was a 12-month project, so we surprised to see that there was some early adoption straight away of using these resources as soon as we put them up. First of all, Pett of the Portable Antiquities scheme started incorporating the URIs of these concepts into the data there. And you can see we've actually got URIs of equivalent concepts in the British Museum's linked data, because they've had an exercise of putting their data online. So there's some very early adoption of these things, which is really encouraging to see. Also, one of the, sorry, this is the ADS, incorporating these things into their background CMS system, where they had a kind of drop-down list where you type things in. You can't really see them that well, but it's getting the data again from these control vocabularies, rather than just allowing free text entry, which can be error-prone, and at the end of it you've just got a word with no connection to anything else. And then finally, the Fluidpowers Archaeological Trust, where one of their developers picked these things up and started to create a mobile application, a field recording application, where he had a little drop-down thing where you started selecting from the vocabularies again for your monument type. Yeah, so again, rather than just having text in the field, it was giving you the option to select a concept that would be globally known to everybody. So everybody knows if you selected movable bridge, everybody in the world knows what you're talking about, because you can actually go to that URI and get all the other information about it. Okay. So what are the next steps for us? Well, we want to identify potential applications and uses for these things across the domain. We hopefully want to incorporate other vocabularies, and particularly link between vocabularies. We've got a number of different monuments thesauri, a number of different object thesauri, and other linked data resources as well outside. We've got DBpedia and geonames and things like this. So there's opportunities to link between all of these things, hopefully creating useful links to other resources, and maybe some more of these predefined user interface widgets that we can create that can be slotted into web pages. Because we created ones that we thought would be useful, but it'd be very nice to hear what other people think are useful. Maybe none of those, maybe something else completely, but it would be nice to incorporate more of those. So that's just a little outline of the things that we managed to achieve in that project, and hopefully you'll find all those resources really useful in your own work. And so there's a web page of where you can go to and get details of the services and the widgets and download them and use them. And that's it. Yep. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Ceri. Maybe Ty, has anyone want to give a quick question? Well, Paul, do you want to come and set up anyway? Does anyone want to ask anything on that one, or should we just move on?
How many more times do I have to sit through the same thing?
That was different.
I wasn't asking you, Phil. I was asking Leaf, who's going to ask a much more polite question, I'm sure.
I mean, as you know, I personally think this is the biggest single leap forward in interoperability, in digital interoperability. I think what you've done there, 50% of the connection that the other 50% most people said by everybody else. What I was wondering is you've got the terminology in terms of producing RDF, in terms of kind of connecting data records to those things. For widgets, have you got any plans, or have you already created a data API that can harvest that RDF and make it simpler for people? So at the minute, presumably one project has their RDF, somebody else has their RDF, somebody has their RDF. But people managing and manipulating RDF is still a bit of a challenge. But putting together an API that takes that and makes it very simple, you simply, from any of those sites, be able to say, right, here's a record that's about tenement house, show me all the other stuff in any of these things with the tenement house to give you the links directly to it. It should be really straightforward. I'm just wondering, is that done? Is it on the agenda?
Tools for making relationships between different disparate linked data resources are out there, but I think at the moment they're fairly primitive. They're on the level of, look at the spelling of this thing, have you got anything with the same spelling, give me all the options. And then you make a kind of semi-automatic link, as it were.
But you created the graph, right? I mean, you already have a graph. You don't need to do that semi-automated matching anymore. So, in principle, because you've got an RDF link that says, here's my record, and it refers to this table, the graph exists. All you need is an API that just takes that RDF and feeds it out. I mean, this is a conversation that we have later on, but I think it's
a nice idea.
It just takes data that's already there.
Presumably, the case that will grow if more people start linking to the URIs of the tenement.
I'd say it was the other way around. I'd say the minute you've got that API, then everybody else, that gives them an instant motivation to produce that idea because then they're part of that API cloud as well. So that would be my...
That's a good use case. Thank you. Right. Shall we let Paul, I'm aware that I let Ceri run a bit longer than he should, so we better get on with Paul. Thank you.
Okie dokie. My name's Paul Cripps. I'm an independent spatial technologies, geomatics type of guy, and I'm currently undertaking doctoral research at the University of South Wales on geosemantic technologies. So more on that in a moment. What I've tried to do here is sort of take some of the things that I'm working with in my research and try and apply them to this sort of this domain, this historic environment thing, and try and come up with some ideas for discussion. So please take it in the spirit to which it's intended. So we'll have a look at sort of some background where I'm coming from, some of the resources that we've got, some of the problems that we have with spatial data, some of the potential that some of these new technologies and approaches offer, and then some ideas for some strategy and some issues with moving forward with such a strategy. So, background. My research project is called G-Style, which is Geosemantic Technologies for Archaeological Resources. So it's working within sort of two subject areas, the semantic web linked data side of things and also the geospatial side of things. And it's the fusion of these two areas. All of the sort of linked data stuff that Ceri was talking about is now sort of extending into the geospatial arena. So everything that Ceri said, plus geometries and places and all that kind of stuff. And to do this, there's emerging ontologies for dealing with the specifics. Ceri mentioned SCOS. There's a similar kind of thing called GeoSparkle, which is emerging as a standard, it is a standard. And that's the kind of thing I'm working with. So it's very much what Ceri said, but spatial. Just as a sort of flavour, one of the case studies that I'm looking at is how we can sort of link data between archaeological excavation records as they move up into the inventories and across into the museum. So a lot of the time the links between these data objects get broken for one reason or another, but we can use the spatial components to try and link this stuff back together. So that's just an idea. So when I'm talking about the spatial entities, what am I talking about? Largely the vector objects, points, lines, polygons that we're dealing with in our information systems are typically database environments, increasingly sort of linked data environments. In the historic environment, we have a very, very broad range of stuff. I'm going to whiz through this bit very quickly because I want to get on to the potential bits, but as you can see, whole range of data types of information, and metadata, information about the information. This is an example of some of the sort of rich spatial data that gets produced by contracting units. The kind of project GIS that is used for the interpretation and analysis of sites. And we've got identified archaeological features, interventions, post-ex finds data attached to these things. We have multimedia attached, so we have images of hand-drawn plans, section drawings, all that kind of stuff. So a very rich digital resource, which acts as the source for sort of historic environment records in many ways. Another example, this is the Stonehenge Navy World Heritage Site GIS, which is a management tool maintained by English Heritage for managing the World Heritage Site. And one of the key bits in this is the HER data. So they extract data from the HER, put it into a separate system to do management type stuff with. Moving forward a bit, this is an example of some of this geospatial linked data. So what you see here is the kind of graph that Ceri was describing. And importantly, if we get down to the bottom here, this whole section of the graph down there is all Ordnance Survey open linked data. So we're referring to the concepts such as North Lincolnshire as a county. So this is starting to get the geospatial into the world of the linked data. So what resources have we got out there as historic environment sector? We have local resources. We have the HERs, many of whom are using GIS, and they work in many and varied different ways. We also have national resources. So we have AMI, the Archaeological Inventory maintained by English Heritage. We have the National Heritage List for England, which is the statutory stuff, scheduling, listing, all that kind of thing, which also has a legal element to it, and comparable resources in Scotland and Wales. I'm sorry, I'm going to focus largely on England today, I'll come back to Scotland again at the end. And on top of that, we have a whole plethora of other resources out there. So resources in planning authorities, national parks often maintain their own information systems. There's HERs out in commercial companies and heritage trusts. We have a whole range of infrastructure such as Heritage Gateway and Oasis. The National Trust maintain an HER. The churches folk are currently implementing their own system for managing churches. DEFRA have data that we use. Portable Antiquities scheme. On top of all this, we have subject-specific resources such as project archives, specific databases on specific themes. We have things like the AIP, which draws things together and is another separate resource. And then we have all the publications, the grey literature, museum collections, and a whole bunch of digital archives residing in places like contracting units. So, basically what I'm saying is we've got a lot of data out there. Big problem with this is this data is managed in a very disparate way. So we have a lot of duplication of data, not for any particular good reason in many cases. It overlaps, it conflicts. We have issues concording where we have the same thing referred to in different resources. How do we reconcile that in order to do the work that we do? Maintaining this infrastructure is costly. Constantly exchanging, transferring, exporting, publishing, re-importing takes time. It drains resources. This is compounded by sort of formats and systems, interoperability. There's the perennial bugbear of non-digital data or digital data such as PDF, which isn't particularly what you'd call spatial data. All of this compounded together makes it difficult to use. Then we've got other things as well that chip in there, such as licensing, costs, paying for data. Spatial data as text. In a lot of these information resources, even GIS, things like county, parish, isn't treated as spatial data, it's treated as a text-based index on the data. And that takes time to maintain and ensure that that's up to date and current. And the idea that once we've finished with our digital data, we put it in a pile, put it over there. It would be nice to actually have this data available for reuse so that we can layer stuff on top of it. And retention and disposal as well. When you start getting into the local authority realm, there are policies to do with retaining data, which data should be retained, which data should be disposed of, which, when we're talking about the longevity of our shared cultural heritage knowledge, can be problematic. So, here we have our little historic environment person down the bottom here, wanting to undertake some work, and these are the things he has to think about. He's got to acquire the data. He's then got to transfer the data. Might have to pay for the data. In many cases, he's got to digitize paper stuff that gets sent through the post. He's got to check that he's licensed to do what he wants to do with the data. He's then got to clean the data, make sure that all those inconsistent terms that Ceri was talking about are dealt with. if he's got data from 3 sources, he's got to stick it all together and work out, okay, I've got 3 monument records, are they the same monument? After all that, you can finally get on and do some heritage work. And this is just all of the different sort of resources that we've got available and the path that some of this data goes through. So basically, what I'm suggesting is, it's a bit of a pickle. So some possibilities. These are some of the sort of things emerging from the research that I and others are doing, which may help with some of this. So one of the things with the graphs that Ceri was showing is the idea of inferencing. If we know certain assertions about information are true, we can infer other pieces of information. So in the case here, we know that this particular monument is in a particular parish, county. We can infer, if we know that that is the same as the other monument, we can therefore infer that the other record is in the same place. If we know that this, if we do some concordance work out, this monument is the same as this monument, and this monument is referred to by a particular archaeological activity which produced a report, we can then infer that that report also applies to the other monument record. And the great thing with some of the spatial geosemantic stuff is it supports a broad range of spatial operators. So we can talk about intersecting. A lot of the tools that we use in our GIS we can use within these inferencing tools. So is it contained by, does it intersect these kinds of fairly fundamental spatial relationships? Right. We could also use this to enhance and enrich existing resources. So the colonisation of Britain project that I showed you the quick slide of, I used the Open Refine platform alongside the Ordnance Survey's Reconciliation API to turn the text strings that were the parishes and the counties into the URIs that Ceri was talking about. So we've gone from text, string to concept there. So we can then shove this data back into our information systems. So we're enhancing, we're enriching them. We can use the spatial side of things to mediate our searches. So if, for example, we're searching for heritage assets in a particular parish, our information system can say, well, we've got these different parishes here, which one do you want? We could, there's data sets out there for referring to historic parishes. We could even include those. Which geometry, which boundary do you mean when you talk about this particular parish? Or you can have a user-defined one. So in other words, we can actually feed the geometries that we're drawing out of this information system to use as the basis for the query, which we can pass off to our web services, and then request that data back in a format that suits the need of our client application, be that what it is. We can, this is interesting and up for discussion, national resources. Are they not simply an aggregation of the local resources? So we have our HERs with all their different depictions. This is the same monument, and we have our national record. Can we not see the overview, the national record, as simply an aggregation of the collective local records? With, obviously, additional data. So if there is actually additional stuff to be recorded here, you can have that. But you don't need to duplicate the work that's being done at this point. You can layer this stuff, you can link this stuff. So potential, we're talking about aligned resources using these persistent identifiers that Ceri talked about. Linking data, not exchanging, copying, transferring. Aggregation, not duplication. We can draw up and synthesize using these structured techniques, which allows us to focus our resources by sharing our efforts. So each group of people within the historic environment sector can focus on maintaining the information that is pertinent to them, and then it all comes together by using this linking approach. True spatial indices, so we can talk about the actual polygons rather than the terms for the parishes and counties. All this is dependent on standards, and there are now lots of standards out there emerging and published for doing all of this. I would suggest that we build on the good bits of existing infrastructure. There's some really good stuff out there. Oasis, for example, we can We can do a lot more with that. The Heritage Gateway, open up the API, provide more access to things like that. But crucially, local maintenance. The people that know our cultural heritage data the best are the people closest to it. So I would suggest that it's the HER folk that should be the core of this, view. So moving towards a strategy, we need to bear in mind who is a stakeholder in this cultural environment thing that we're talking about, historic environment, sorry, and focus on user needs, responsibilities, skills that came up earlier, funding, all of these things. But crucially, divide the labour, share the load, make it more efficient, and then we'll have more time to concentrate on things like content. For those of you who like 80s children's TV, this is Voltron. This is how I see the historic environment sector functioning. We are each of these different things. We all do our own thing in our own way, and we come together like Voltron. I was recently made aware of the Scottish experience, the shed. Crucially, they've done quite a lot of work on this. It's taken a number of years to get to this point, and they looked at a single definitive resource as opposed to sort of these distributed linked approaches, and they seem to have gone for the latter. So I'm not speaking in isolation. I think this is a great piece of work, and I give it a big green tick. So overall, this is just kind of a shelling out of how this sort of stuff could work. So we have inventory management systems, tools. We have data creators and maintainers working with these tools to maintain their own bit of our shared resources. Through standards-based interfaces, we can provide access. This can be controlled access. I'll put this in case there is a need for paywalls or secure access if the information is deemed as sensitive or whatever, to various clients to provide access. And importantly, we can use the linked data approaches to link out to these whole range of resources that are out there on the web. All these slides will be up on SlideShare later, so do have a look and comment. Big issue with implementing such an infrastructure is where these resources reside. So in many cases, they're within host organizations who may not be able to actually do some of this for one reason or another. In the research community, a lot of these tools are free and open source software. They are not commercial off-the-shelf tools, and that can be problematic for particularly local government, where they may well have policies which restrict the deployment of such systems. So there are thorny issues here to be resolved, many of which are political and not necessarily technological. But the key here is compliance and standards. Oh, the government procurement bit. That's actually quite important. After the lock-in that the government have had with particularly Microsoft over the last decade, they're now moving away from specifying software and towards specifying open standards. And this is the kind of move that we can leverage to try and get some of these technologies and tools out there. So we need to make better use of our spatial data resources. Efficiency is the key word here, especially in these times of austerity. Not efficiency as in making people redundant because we don't need them anymore, as in we can free them up to do more useful work through linking, sharing and working together, leveraging technology infrastructure, improving our shared skill base and focusing on what users actually need. We can do this using standards, so we have the industry standards, sort of web stuff, the geospatial stuff, the heritage standards. But the standards that we work with need to be collaborative, workable and usable. And just to reinforce, standards. There's my details. All my research gets blogged on the G-Star blog. There's my 2 research groups and my contact details are at the top. So do feel free to get in touch. Thank you.
a lot to think about there, both in the technology and, as you say, the sort of social and people side. Does anyone have a quick question? I asked Dan to come and set up while time for one. Martin.
I picked up on an interesting contradiction between your presentation and the one from Chris Gosden earlier. I don't know if Chris is still around.
I'm here.
Oh, yes,
Yeah.
good. Because you mentioned about the national record being an aggregation, potentially, of all the records which are held in the HERs plus a few extras, whereas Chris made the observation that where there was overlap, the national record often had information that wasn't in the HERs and vice versa for the same sites. So it's not a duplication.
No, and I mean, there's going to be bits of information that are necessarily different and create different records for them and link them. It's not a contradiction. That was kind of to provoke a bit of discussion in terms of
And I rose to it.
do we really? I mean, is the additional overhead of maintaining a totally distinct record, which 80% of which duplicates the local records, is that worthy of maintaining the status quo?
Chris's statistic earlier was 50 to 75% of the subject areas of the spatial areas he'd looked at.
You get the point, Martin.
Oh,
Yeah?
no,
Right. I think rather than swallowing hard on that one, shall we get Dan to come and give us some exciting ideas for what he's been doing before Atlantic?
Thanks, Keith. As you said, I'm Daniel Pett. I'm ICT advisor for the British Museum. I'm going to give you a little bit of history about the Portal Antiquity Scheme website I've been running for 10 years now, and a little bit of history about other things that I'm up to. If you've got any questions, talk to me afterwards, and the slides are actually online now as well. If anyone's on Twitter, they can find out where these are. So I'm going to start with 2001. And many of you might remember the Portal Antiquity Scheme back there. It looked pretty awful. This is the old website, how it used to look. And this comes back from the Wayback Machine. You can actually find snapshots of our website online in the Internet Archive. This just shows you what it used to look like. In 2003, we had Oxford Art Digital build us a website. It cost quite a lot of money. £150,000 is a lot of money, even now. It looked pretty old school web in its function. And then from 2007, after they went bust, I implemented all the technology. I've recently been joined by Mary Chester-Cadwell from Norfolk HER. She's with me for 6 months. And one of the big problems for the Portal Antiquity Scheme is ICT risk. If I was doing all the implementation, if I decided to leave or something happened to me, what would happen with the scheme's infrastructure? So Kate Clark identified this back in 2008, and we did nothing about it until 2014. So we should have done something. We didn't. And this is what it looks like now. So it's changed substantially. It's got lots of new features. And I'm going to show you some of these features that I'm working on now and the technology base that we're actually using. So this slide might be quite scary to a lot of you. I'm using a lot of different technologies. Paul referred to some of these. Now, they're all open source. They're all free. I do not pay a single penny for licensing fees. I don't pay any money for developing the websites. The latest iteration costs nothing apart from my salary. So we've saved lots of money in the long term compared to how much we're paying for Oxford Art Digital to keep building websites for us. So there's the cat up there. I've got a cat into my talk. That's Tomcat. I use PHP for my programming language. I use Python for munching data around. And these are the 3 pillars of actually what I'm up to now. I work on open source technology. I put our data out under a Creative Commons license, and we try and be open data as much as we can. Now, this is a problem for some of the organisations that might be in the room, open data. How can you do that when your institution is telling you must make money from the information? I took our non-commercial clause off 3 years ago, and our usage has been driven through the roof by doing this. I'm going to show you some stats that show you how much we're using our website now. So this is my annual budget, £5,000. Now this is actually paying for the servers to actually run. I have to pay some money out. That actually just pays for the infrastructure. So I've got 5 servers, they're based in Reading. And I pay for them to be on 24/7 every day of the year. So it's actually quite cheap to run that sort of hardware. 5 servers at £5,000 is nothing really in the big scheme of things. This is how many contributors we now have for the Portal Antiquity Scheme, 24,000. It's not very many when you think about the population of this country, 66 million people, but we've got 24,000 people wanting to come forward and contribute data to the Portal Antiquity Scheme. We have nearly 1 million objects online now. That's a lot of data to play with. It's almost verging on big data, but not quite there yet. Big data is much bigger than this, but we keep pushing this paradigm out that big data is large like this. It's not. We can do lots more with data. I have 954,000 objects, but I have 16 million records in the database of different actions, what people are doing. Now that's big data. You can do lots of interesting text mining with that data and find out what people's voices are saying over time. Who are the people writing things about what we're up to? I'm just going to show you a few figures about visitor numbers. So this is back in 2003 when Oxford Art Digital built our database. 10,000 people a year used our website. That's really, really small. In 2006, just before they went bust, we went up to 165,000 people a year using our website. It's the same budget as we had before, but different technologies started to be employed. And in 2011, we're up to nearly 500,000. This is starting to get a reasonable figure. Still not really penetrated the larger world. Then 2012, we broke 500,000. Same again last year. And this year we're looking at about 600,000 people, I think, looking at projections. And this is the interesting thing. We're collating all this data, just as you all are as heritage professionals. But people are starting to use our data for informing their own research. We now have 415 research projects actually using our data that we catalogue. On our website, I keep a record of who's using our data and what for. I ask them to submit an abstract and a referee, and I check them out and find out whether the research is bona fide, and then they get access. So Chris mentioned earlier that we provided them with data. So I think that's the project using our data in the biggest style. And I've just given Chris a huge update, Chris Green, of data, and I think he's been a bit worried about how much data has shifted across the country. We have 604 people putting data into our system. That's 604 people who can make errors. So error margin is huge. And I found out that lots of people can't read maps. They get the wrong grid square. So they get the easting and northing slightly right, but it's still looking in the wrong place. But now that computer technology has come along, it makes it much easier for people to map grid references using different technology. That's just about multivocal data capture. But we have 6,700 users who actually use our system now. We estimate there's about 10,000 people out there who metal detect. So you could be a bit blasé and say 67% of them are using our database and actually logging in to see their finds, but they're not. This is members of the community, this is research professionals. And this figure is a bit staggering. Apparently, I have 8.6 million pages on our website. I'm sure I don't have that many physical web pages. I have lots of RDF views. I have lots of XML. And then Google indexes all of those. So we have high visibility. When you do a search for Roman coins, we come up near the top. You can actually put finds numbers into Google and they come up as the top result now as well. And data's being captured in real time. So this is a map from yesterday afternoon. And the map on the left view shows dots on the map where objects are being created. You can actually see an audit log as well. It tells you when the record was created. So you can see in real time when data's going on. So if someone creates a record in our system and it can be instantly available to the public, and we're doing that nationally. So Paul and I were talking earlier about how HER should really be one national system. Paul thinks they should be integrated in different ways. But you could record all this information online and you can see what's going on and interrogate them all in one place. And this works really well for Port Antiquities. It might not work for the HER, it's one way you could do things. And the map on the right just shows you where coins have been found in this country. And Wales, sorry, I should say Wales as well. And I've got multiple formats. There's Lorna looking at this slide. There's one thing that she really hates, and that's QR codes. But I think they can be used in a very good way when it comes to archaeological data. Whenever we print off a record, every record has a QR code attached to it. And you can give that to the finder, and they can stick it on a finds bag, and you can actually use that code to find out where the URL is, and they can go to it. I have data in XML format. This is my standard on the right-hand side. I have data in JSON. I have data in RDF. I have it in CSV, lots of other formats that you can download. And people keep saying to me, let's build an app for your website. But what's the point? It's just an expensive digital silo. You're pushing data into that. You've got to keep going back and updating it. I can't afford to do that. The return on investment is so negligible. And I think Lorna's found this in her research when she's been asking heritage societies and archaeologists whether apps should be used. And I think she tweeted yesterday that there's no real appetite for them. And do we know our audiences? Am I right there, Lorna? Yeah. So what I decided to do instead was mobile optimise our website using Bootstrap, which is a CSS framework that's free. Anyone can download this. And as you can see, it works. You can even get maps to work. You can zoom around and you can pan and zoom in. There are a few problems, but we're ironing those out now. And we started to recycle data in various different ways. So we just had a little bit of background to Seneschal. I'm using that data, as you just found out. I'm also using Ordnance Survey data. So Paul mentioned data sets that I could actually link to and interrogate at the same time. I can also go off and find out information from the ONS. So I can find out what people are earning in that district, what their interest that might be. All this stuff that's been collated, a bit scary in some ways. And these are just some examples of where I'm using the Ordnance Survey data. So every find spot, as Paul said, has got strings of text attached to them, identifying the parish, district, region, the county. But these link off to URIs, which can give you far more information back. So I can get the grid reference for the centre of that parish, or the centre of that county, or the centre of that region, and tell people what they would be. Sometimes someone comes forward without a grid reference for a find. I can centre it in a parish and tell people it's centred on a parish just from using a URI. And we also link off to all these other resources. So I link to resources like Pleiades and Numisma. This is a coin system and a Roman gazetteer. I link off to DVpedia, so I pull back information relating to kings. You gave a very good example earlier. And I use VIAF as well. So there's always identifiers out there you can pull extra information from. But most people, when you go to hack days, say, I don't want to play with RDF, it's too complex to play with. They just want your data. So I do a dump every night of data into CSV, and that goes into Amazon Web Services. All our data can be queried using the Solr syntax and the search engine, which you're probably not familiar with, but if you do a search on our website, some help how to do this. And we replicate our servers across 5 different servers. We have 5 indexes, so we're optimizing what we're actually up to. The images are backed up to the cloud every night. I pay about £20 a month out of my own pocket to support the scheme, to back up the data, because I'm worried about data failure. My servers are all in the same place, so if they go offline because of some natural disaster, at least I've got a backup somewhere else. We have lots of technology partnership projects going on at the moment with AHRC funding, Leverhulme Trust, and we work with Oxford as well quite extensively. So I'm going to give you some examples now of what we're doing. So this is just data transfer. I've recently had funding with Dan Hicks from Pitt Rivers Museum, where we're going to try and transfer data from the museum into our data set, and then onto the historic environment records, where you download data from us, you get their data at the same time. This is a pilot project, and we've got £29,000 to do this. And if it works, we can try and do it with other museums as well. We also dump data out into Plagios, which Leif mentioned earlier, I think. So every night we produce a dump of data, and I think that goes in about once a month to your system. And we try and transfer data to HERs, but this isn't always successful. We know there's errors in the data, and some HERs have a real problem actually ingesting our data. There's not enough man time, and this is one of the things I think keeps coming out today, time. We don't have time to do all this work. And I'm always struggling with time to do the work that I'm trying to do. So people keep saying, have you built this feature yet? I'm still trying to do some of the other ones that people asked for in the past. So Nick emailed me last week asking if there's a web feature service. I'd love there to be one. I just haven't got time to implement it at the moment. Maybe next year. Then we've got some other things that have gone online recently. Visualizations are all the rage now. So I got some funding from the HRC, just £5,000 to build this application with a company called Trace Media. And a chap called Gavin Bailey met me at a Wikipedia conference when I was talking about us sharing data with Wikipedia. And he came up to me afterwards and said, I'd love to work with your data, because archaeology data is structured, it's interesting, there's time, there's people attached. And so he built this visualization for us. This shows you where the mints are for Roman coins, or any other type of coin. And you click on a mint, and it shows you where the coins have been found in the UK. And we're now working crowdsourcing as well. Some of you might have heard of this new project I've launched recently with Andy Bevan of UCL. This is micropasts. We're trying some different techniques out. We're looking at crowdsourcing as an academic exercise to see whether people are actually interested in doing crowdsourcing work. So we've taken 30,000 index cards from the British Museum Bronze Age Archive, and we're scanning them on a high-speed scanner in the basement of our offices at the moment. We've done 10,000 so far. These are going online, and we're hoping people might transcribe them for us. They've never been seen before by the public, so it's a resource that it could actually take all of the resource themselves and just do it selfishly, or they can contribute to human knowledge by doing it for everyone. We're also doing some 3D modelling. I'll come back to the 3D modelling. We're also going to look at crowdfunding as well. Crowdfunding is possibly a concept that won't actually work in archaeology. Is there enough money to support what's going on? So we're looking at very small funding ideas. Someone might want £1,000 to do some archaeological research, and they can bid for it on this site. So they put up a video of what they want to do, and a bit of background information. And then the public might fund them. Whether it happens or not is a different matter. And this goes live next month, we hope. Yeah, I'll finish. And this is an example of a 3D model that's been done by co-production. So the public were asked to draw polygons around these axe photos. This was actually produced by 20 photos being done by the public, and we did this as our first model. We're actually hoping to 3D print a hoard at the British Museum at a children's event, so they can actually handle these objects. And we're also looking at other technology as well. We're doing video conferencing with schools based around the Froome hoard. This is my wife sitting in the students' room for prehistory in Europe as the children see it. We've got a backdrop, her with the video equipment. She's running this session. It's run for the first time last month, and it's been quite successful. So we're going to offer this at a greater audience, hopefully, if more schools sign up to it. And we also use social media to try and push our message out. Now, Lauren's PhD, which is forthcoming, has looked at social media use in archaeology a lot, and it's not a silver bullet for people to communicate with the public. I've just marked a dissertation for UCL, which actually says the opposite to what Lauren has found out. And they see social media being this really good thing that you can communicate with a new public. Is the appetite there? I'm not really sure it is in a great scale. There's no really big archaeological followings out there. When you look at a celebrity who's got 16 million followers, or 1.6 million followers, are we going to actually penetrate to a large audience using social media? But we've been using these tools for quite a while now. So we've been blogging since 2007. But that's currently offline because one of my servers broke. We use Flickr for a very long time as well. We disseminate our images on there. So I put up the pictures of Staffordshire Hoard the day it broke, and 250,000 people viewed those images in one day, which is quite a good figure. We use Twitter, but not very extensively because I don't have time to do it for that. I do it for myself far more than I do for work. I use Facebook for work as well, but also not as much as I do for myself. And I'm supporting others as well. So there's one project that some of you might have heard of, which is Day of Archaeology, which I promised Lorna that I'd mention today. We give them server space as our sponsorship. And I also provide server space to the Palestine Exploration Fund, which I was a trustee for, but I'm not anymore. And also for the Royal Numismatic Society. So I'm very willing to offer server space on our servers, because they've got 2 terabytes sitting there with nothing going on. So if anyone does need some help, do come talk to me afterwards. And that's the end. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thanks, Dan, for this.
You need to catch up, didn't you?
Well, no, it's just that covered a whole range of things that we might be talking about in this session. But I think I'd like to, because the timetable is suggesting we have 20 minutes, I think, to actually focus on the questions that are coming up in the session. Do we have something to click on that brings those questions up? Which I noticed isn't in this session, it was in the last session.
There should be pieces of paper.
There, they're on the breakout discussion sessions. So what I'm wondering is whether now, if we haven't got a coffee break in this session, and I don't know whether we want to have a comfort break. Was that Sarah? Where are you? Is it now, if you want a comfort break now and then come back and get into the groups for the last? So people need to change tables when they come back, is that? They're all in the same table. Okay, we'll call it. Can you literally be back? Did we say back by past? Yeah. How did they manage it? There was a slide, wasn't there, for the preview?
Anyway, doesn't matter. Hello, we're about to shut down. Thank you.